All right, just checking everyone can see my slides as well. If you can just give me a thumbs up or something like that.
Yes, we can see.
We can.
Perfect. All right, great. So I'll get started. Hi, everyone. My name is Tanvi Kanchan, and I'm a PhD candidate at SOAS University of London, where my research explores the possibilities and limitations of queer and trans women's digital cultures on social media platforms. So today I'm going to be presenting some insights from an upcoming journal article titled Instagram is Like a Karela, Transnational Digital Queer Politics and Online Censorship and Surveillance in India. And my insights today draw on the latter half of the article, where I explore the ways in which Instagram's political economy, particularly the nexus of corporate and state surveillance and censorship, renders marginal queer and trans users particularly vulnerable. I'm just going to be reading so that I keep to time. So as one participant puts it, Instagram functions as a Karela or a bitter melon or a bitter gourd, describing their experience as Zahar khana pad raha hai par amrut bhi mil raha hai, which means that we're having to eat poison, but we also get some nectar. So the insights that I use today are drawn from 23 in-depth interviews with queer and trans women and non-binary Instagram users and community organizers across India, conducted February to April 2023 during my doctoral fieldwork. So I want to start by just laying out the frame from which I'm entering this space. I'm interested in the affordances that social media offers queer and trans users to assert, contest, and negotiate ideas of queerness, to mobilize politically, and to build relationships and intimacies. And I'm interested in the space that social media offers for assertions and negotiations of a radical feminist politics of queer liberation, and the ways in which the simultaneously bordered and borderless space of social media enables transnational and translocal communication flows. Now, much of the research that exists on queer digital cultures has focused primarily on cisgender gay men, whether in the West, and I have some examples here of Shaka McLaughlin and Sharif Mullah-Bokas's work, or specifically in India, such as Rohit Dasgupta and Parmesh Shahani's work. And less attention has really been paid to the digital cultures of queer women and trans people, particularly to how the political economy of social media structures its use for such users. And today I'm going to explore some of the ways in which state and corporate entanglements of digital and algorithmic governance, the suppression and or criminalization of dissent in India, online or otherwise, and practices of digital epistemic injustice are experienced by queer and trans users on Instagram. But first, what do I mean by a radical feminist politics of queer liberation? So a radical progressive and feminist queer politics in India must contend with, and indeed explicitly disavow, the twin forces of Hindu nationalist co-optations and the singular emphasis on a neoliberal human rights framework as a pathway for queer liberation. And I argue that it must really reject co-optations of decolonization by the Indian right wing to justify the Hindu nationalist project. Such a critique must also question how assemblages of caste, class, religion, gender, family, and the nation state interact with queer and trans politics. This critique must necessarily be trans-feminist, anti-caste, anti-Islamophobic, and anti-Hindu nationalist. And I argue that we must look to the demands, politics, activism, and organizing that stems from communities of marginal queers, such as queer women, trans and non-binary people, Muslim and Dalit Bahujan Adivasi or DBA people, as the space from which to mold such a critique and the space through which to imagine and locate queer and trans liberation. And this piece really centers these voices and experiences. So social media offers unprecedented opportunities for queer and trans political formations, but such users are still enmeshed in the political economy and governance logics of the online spaces that they engage with. Digital platform design and governance is rooted in a Silicon Valley imagination, and user choice and agency on social media does not exist in a vacuum, but is influenced by several factors, including negotiations with platform algorithms, content moderation practices, and fears of state surveillance and punitive action. Digital technologies are not inherently positive or negative. I feel like we heard this yesterday as well when Disha was speaking, and are therefore also not necessarily drivers of transformative progressive change, but they are molded by their political economic structures and the users that they can be put to. So let's consider Natasha's experiences. All names are pseudonyms here. Let's consider Natasha's experiences with Instagram suspending the account of the queer anti-caste collective that they co-founded. They say when someone famous with a lot of followers has shared one of our posts, we've got major right-wing trolls that come in and start commenting. And then you have to delete those comments and report the person, but nothing happens because obviously Meta does not care about right-wing trolls. They, the trolls, have done nothing wrong in their eyes. Instead, one day we found that our entire profile was not on the internet and was no longer on Instagram. So their experience is not unique. Research has shown that DBA activists face disproportionate amounts of hate speech, trolling, gaslighting, and questioning online. Meta includes caste as a protected category vis-a-vis hate speech on Facebook, but interestingly not on Instagram, yet it still routinely fails to implement these safeguards. A great deal of casteist hate speech remains on Facebook despite being reported. In certain cases, accounts of DBA users themselves are removed or banned, as we've seen with Natasha. Such experiences replicate across platforms, with the probability of harassment, discrimination, and censorship heightening for users at the intersection of caste, gender, sexuality, and class marginality. So for DBA queer and trans users, Instagram presents a space of possibility, but it also presents a site of violence, censorship, policing, and near constant negotiations. Natasha continues, our content does not reach a large enough audience. I do think that there is a certain level of not shadow banning, but a certain type of content gets more visibility on Instagram just by virtue of what type of content Instagram pushes, and that's maybe not our content. So Coswick and Sengupta talk about how the monopoly of huge global north corporations over social media results in a privileging of Western epistemological approaches to platform design and governance, which in turn results in a form of digital epistemic injustice. So certain knowledges and narratives are privileged over others in virtual worlds through practices of content moderation, decision makers behind digital infrastructures, the predominance of English as the default language of the internet, and so on. So in effect, social media users can reach innumerable others and post whatever they want, but quote, only as long as the corporate owners permit it and the algorithms that structure the platform surface it to a broad audience, end quote, as Zeynep Tufekci puts it, and only as long as such content is not summarily taken down when it upsets the status quo. So my interviewees were keenly aware of this tension, and it was an awareness that had been built through trying to make sense of their experiences of being moderated and censored. Sarika works for a digital media collective that encourages conversations around sexuality and desire. Their organization's Instagram is subject to constant censorship and moderation, and the platform's appeals process often yields no results. So Sarika points out the deliberate opaqueness of Instagram's algorithm and moderation practices, and they say, Meta does not make itself understandable to you. It has this air of, I am a mystery and you will never understand me, but you're supposed to use me anyway. At the same time, they describe it as a necessary evil when engaging in queer community building, admitting that their Instagram audience reach would not be reproducible offline. And they say, even if you do an on-ground event every day, you won't get the kind of visibility you get from social media. So in a similar vein, May says, Instagram is not designed for marginalized people. Let's be very honest about it. People feel like if you post anything against the ruling party or anything which quote unquote is deemed anti-Indian, there would be problems with you getting a visa, getting passports, or even getting a government job. So that's a fear I see in a lot of people. People who used to post about all these things have now stopped themselves from doing it. And I want to put that in conversation with Iman's points here. And Iman connects the dots between Hindu nationalism, corporate censorship, and digital policing through her repeated experiences of being shadow banned on Instagram. And she describes having her reach limited and being unable to post something for up to 3 days whenever she posts content critical of the government. And she says, Instagram can very heavily control where your content is served. Basically, their solution is to limit our reach instead of taking away the people who are bullying. There's nothing I can do about certain parts of my identity. I can change my name, but I'll still be Muslim. And wherever I go, people will find it out no matter what I do. And then the trans thing you can't really hide. So it's going to be at the forefront all the time. I'm very aware constantly about surveillance because I know that I have and most likely am being surveilled. And that's just the reality I live with. We do live in a world where at some point, the reality of UAPA happening for me and me being called a terrorist is very real. So state control and governance heavily structures digital space. Dasgupta and Dasgupta argue that neoliberalism, nationalism, digital technologies, and queerness are entangled in contemporary India. A platform like Instagram then may offer radical new opportunities for queer and trans users in India, but it also presents a space for the disciplining and the governance of bodies deemed undesirable for the state. With the digital sphere becoming the Indian government's new frontier for development and progress through neoliberal projects like Digital India, the landscape of queer politics online is changing dramatically. The collusion of Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg in Digital India also gestures to an entanglement of the Indian nation state and corporate governance that puts certain users at particular intersections of vulnerability. The BJP government's use of social media to further their campaign goals and fuel Islamophobia has been well documented. These activities have been either actively enabled by companies like Meta or ignored in the interest of the profitability of the Indian market. And we've also seen the BJP government make consolidated moves to solidify their legal power over digital space since the pandemic. India has seen the most internet shutdowns of any country in the world in the last 5 years, and social media platforms, as we heard yesterday, are now obligated to comply with content takedown notices from the government or risk being held legally and financially liable. So as evidenced by my interviewees' experiences, Muslim and DBA trans users are particularly vulnerable to these forms of surveillance and censorship, which impacts their agency in using such spaces to express dissent and to enact a queer politics that is necessarily anti-caste, anti-Hindu nationalist, and anti-fascist. Ultimately, studies of queer digital cultures need to be located in analyses of the political economy of digital platforms and its impact on user agency, paying attention to which users are particularly vulnerable to corporate state nexuses of surveillance and censorship. It's important to locate Indian queer digital cultures in this context and to build such a critique on the foundation of the queer transfeminist politics, activism, organizing, and experiences of marginal queer and trans people.